Here's a question I want to sit with for a moment before we begin. What would it take? What kind of evidence? What kind of argument? What kind of encounter to make you take this seriously? Not to make you believe it, just to take it seriously. And here's the second one. If you've been inside this for years, if you've been in the pews, doing the work, saying the prayers, when did you start feeling like the foundation might be shakier than you were told? Not that you stopped believing, just that you stopped being sure. And one more. What if those two people, the one who walked away because it didn't hold up to the scrutiny, and the one who stayed but quietly stopped trusting, what if they're actually asking the same question? Is any of this real? That's where we're starting today. The first two episodes of this series named the problem, the hamster wheel, the exhausting loop of religious effort that keeps moving and never actually changes anything at the root. And the oldest lie, the strategy traced all the way back to Eden, of working at the outside of the dish while the inside stays exactly as it was. This episode steps back, because before we talk about transformation, before we talk about encounter or practice or any of the things this series is building toward, there's a prior question that some of you have been carrying for a long time. The question is this: is the foundation real? Not, is the religious system useful? Not, does the community provide meaningful belonging? Those things can be true of a lot of things. The question is whether the claims at the center of this, the specific, historical, verifiable claims, hold up when you look at them straight. I want to say something directly to two people right now. If you've walked away from this, or if you've been standing at the edge of it, unwilling to walk in, because faith looked like reason's enemy, I want you to hear this clearly. You were right to refuse that version. You were right to refuse a faith that required you to silence your intelligence in order to enter. That is not what's being offered here. And if you've been inside this for years, if you've been doing the work, praying the prayers, serving, showing up, but somewhere during the years of striving, a slow doubt crept in, a sense that the foundation might not be as solid as you were told, that the belief was held together more by habit and community than by anything you'd actually examined. I want to say something to you too. The doubt that arrives during exhaustion is not the same thing as evidence that the foundation is weak. Sometimes doubt is a signal that you got tired, not that you were wrong. This episode is for both of you. Here's the methodology I want to use today, and I want to be explicit about it, because the methodology matters as much as the conclusion. If we're going to compare claims of divine manifestation, claims across traditions that a God appeared in human form, was seen by people, and left a record, we need to use the same criteria for every tradition, not criteria that favor the answer we want. The same criteria historians use for any ancient claim. 4 questions. When were the source documents written relative to the events they describe? How early is the earliest surviving manuscript? How many people claimed to be witnesses? And what is the nature of the claim? Is it presented as mythological narrative or as datable, verifiable history? Let's run that comparison. Same 4 questions, every tradition. Egyptian tradition. The appearances of Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Source documents. Ritual and mythological texts, primarily the Egyptian Book of the Dead, compiled beginning around 1550 BCE. Earliest surviving manuscripts, concurrent with the compositions. The documents themselves are among the oldest. Witnesses unknown. No specific number of witnesses is named anywhere in the tradition. Nature of the claim. Ritual and mythological. These appearances are not placed inside a specific historical moment with named people, datable rulers, or verifiable locations. They are sacred stories. They are not making a historical claim. Hindu texts. The appearances of Krishna, Rama, and Vishnu. Source documents. The Bhagavad Gita, composed somewhere around 400 to 200 BCE. The Mahabharata and Ramayana in the same general range. Earliest surviving manuscripts. The earliest substantial manuscript dates to 1492 CE, a gap of roughly 16 to 1900 years between composition and the oldest manuscript we have. Witnesses. These texts claim thousands within epic narratives. Nature of the claim. The divine appearances are framed inside epic poetry, describing a distant mythological age, not a specific, datable historical moment with named contemporary figures whose existence can be cross-referenced against other records. Greek mythology. The appearances of Zeus, Apollo, Poseidon. Source documents. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, composed around 750 to 700 BCE. Earliest surviving manuscripts. Papyrus fragments from the 3rd century BCE, a gap of roughly 500 years. Complete manuscripts, not until roughly 1700 years after composition. Witnesses unknown. No named witnesses, no historical framework. Nature of the claim. Mythological narrative presented with epic poetry, not a historical claim. Norse tradition. The appearances of Odin, Thor, Freya. Source documents. The Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, compiled by Snorri Sturluson around 1220 CE from pre-Christian oral tradition of an uncertain age. Earliest surviving manuscripts. Early 14th century CE. Witnesses, none claimed. Nature of the claim, a medieval compilation of pre-Christian oral mythology. The time gap between the oral tradition and its written compilation is unknown, and the compilation itself was done in the Christian era. The New Testament account of Jesus. Source documents, composed between 65 and 110 CE. The earliest manuscript fragment, a small piece of John's Gospel, designated P52, dates to around 125 to 150 CE. That is a gap of 20 to 25 years between the events described and the earliest written fragment we have recovered. Witnesses. Specific named people, in specific locations, in a specific Roman province, under specific governors whose names and tenure can be cross-referenced against other historical records. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 6, written by Paul within approximately 20 years of the crucifixion, says that more than 500 people claim to have seen Jesus after his death. And Paul writes this while many of them are still alive, still there, still able to contradict him if he was wrong. Nature of the claim? Historical biography, not epic poetry about a mythological age. The events are anchored inside datable, verifiable Roman history. When you lay those 5 traditions side by side and apply the same 4 questions to each of them, one pattern emerges. 4 of the traditions present their divine appearances within a mythological or epic framework. Sacred narratives passed through oral tradition, compiled centuries or millennia after the events they describe, with unknown or unnamed witnesses and no historical anchor. These traditions are not fraudulent, they are simply not making a historical claim in the same category. The New Testament account is making a different kind of claim entirely. It places a specific person in a specific location at a specific moment in history and names witnesses who were still alive when the claim was written down. Now, I want to be precise about what this does and doesn't prove. This does not prove that the resurrection happened. What it establishes is that if you are applying the same historical criteria to all traditions, if you're asking which one is making a historical claim rather than a mythological one, there is only one tradition claiming physical manifestation of a god that stands in that category. That doesn't make it true, but it does mean the question deserves a serious look. And if you have been dismissing it without having done this comparison honestly, you haven't done the rational thing. You've done the comfortable thing. Rational means following the evidence, and the evidence says this one is worth examining. There's a moment in the book of Acts, chapter 17, that I want to spend a minute in. The Apostle Paul arrives in a city called Berea, and the writer of Acts says something remarkable about the people there. He says they were more noble-minded than the people in the previous city, and then he explains why. The word translated examined, and this matters, is the Greek word "Anakrinō." This is not a word for casual reading. It is a judicial forensic term, the kind of examination a judge conducts when evaluating evidence in a courtroom. The Bereans didn't simply receive Paul's message, they interrogated it. And the text commends them for it, not despite their scrutiny, because of it. Peter writes something that belongs alongside this. His first letter, chapter 3, verse 15. Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. I want you to notice the sequence there. Someone sees something in you, a hope that is already present, already visible, and they ask about it. Peter isn't saying go find people to argue with. He's saying when someone notices the hope and wants to know where it came from, have an answer ready. The defense is a response. It follows the hope. It doesn't produce it. The word for defense is a legal term, same root as the English word apology, apologia, but in its original meaning, it means a formal statement of reasons, made in a legal context. Peter assumes the people he's writing to have reasons they can articulate, but those reasons exist to explain something already real in them, not to generate it. Which means the goal of this episode isn't to win an argument. It's to clear enough ground that honest looking becomes possible. The case for the historical foundation, the comparison we just walked through, isn't the destination. It's the clearing. What you do in the clearing is what the rest of this series is about. And then there is Thomas. If you know anything about Thomas from the gospel accounts, you know that he was the one who wasn't in the room when Jesus appeared to the disciples after the resurrection. And when the others told him what they had seen, he said, I will not believe it unless I can see the nail marks in his hands and put my hand into his side. He demanded physical, verifiable, repeatable evidence. And what does Jesus do? He comes back 8 days later, specifically for Thomas. And he says, John chapter 20, verses 26 through 27, put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand here and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Not, how dare you require evidence? Not, your lack of faith is a failure. Hear, look, touch, see. He met Thomas exactly where Thomas was, with evidence. That is not the portrait of a deity threatened by honest scrutiny. That is the portrait of someone who has nothing to hide. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 14 and 17, "If Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, your faith also in vain. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless." That is not a verse you frame and hang in a church lobby. This is Paul betting everything on a historical fact. He is saying, if you can disprove this, the whole thing collapses. He is not asking for blind faith. He is making a falsifiable claim. And then he says in verse 6 that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at one time, and that most of them are still alive. Still there, still available. You can go ask them. The disciples who walked with Jesus before the crucifixion, the same disciples who ran when he was arrested, who hid behind locked doors afterward, who went back to fishing because they thought it was over, those men, within weeks, are standing publicly in Jerusalem, the city where Jesus was killed, telling everyone who will listen that they saw him alive. Not that they had a spiritual experience, not that they felt his presence. They saw him. And they did not stop saying it. They were beaten for it, imprisoned for it, killed for it. Not one of them, under any of that pressure, said, "We made it up." Now, here's the thing I want to hold carefully. None of this proves the resurrection in the scientific sense. You cannot run a historical event through a laboratory. The scientific method is built to evaluate what is natural and repeatable. And neither history nor the resurrection qualifies on those terms. What it does is establish that the claim was made in a specific historical context by people with every reason to recant and no apparent reason to die for a lie, and that the documents in which they made it are measurably closer to the events they describe than any other religious tradition's founding documents. That is the category we are in. Not certainty, reasonable grounds. More reason to look than to dismiss. The word at the center of this series, the word we introduced in episode 1, is the Greek word aletheia. In the ancient world, it was a synonym for reality, and its antonym was illusion. Jesus didn't say, "I teach the truth," or "I know the truth." He said, "I am the truth. I am the reality." The claim is that the thing, as it actually is, ultimate reality, is not a set of propositions. It is a person. A specific, historical, verifiable person who appeared at a specific moment in history, whose resurrection is documented earlier and more reliably than any other claim of divine manifestation across the traditions. You don't have to believe it today, but you've been given enough to look honestly. Before we get to the practice, I want to say one more thing. If you've been inside this for years, if you've been doing the religious work, going through the motions, striving and falling short and striving again, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, the foundation started to feel less solid, I want you to hear this. The doubt that accumulated during the exhaustion years is not evidence that the foundation is weak. It is evidence that you got tired. Exhaustion distorts everything, including how solid the ground under your feet feels. The evidence that the resurrection claim rests on has not changed. It was there before you got tired. It was there while you were tired. It's still there now. You did not think your way to doubt. You wore your way there. And the way back is not a better argument. The way back is exactly what this episode is pointing toward. someone who can meet you where you are. With evidence if you need it, Thomas got evidence, and with presence if that's where you're starting. That's what this practice is for. I want to guide you into something now. If you're driving or your hands are busy, just listen. You can come back to this. The practice will wait. The study guide chapter for this episode has it written out in full. But if you have a few minutes and a quiet place, set 15 minutes aside. Sit down and bring whatever you actually have right now. Bring the honest skepticism, if that's what's real for you. Bring the quiet doubt you've been carrying around in your chest for longer than you've admitted. Don't clean it up before you bring it. Here's the first step. Believe. Not believe everything, not resolve the skepticism before you begin. Just hold this one thing as true enough to try. If Jesus is who the historical record suggests he is, if he is real, and if he is present, then he is here, right now, in this moment. That's all the belief this step requires. Not certainty, a willingness to proceed as if. Ask. Not a polished prayer, not the version of you that has everything figured out. Just say this, out loud or internally. Jesus, if you're real, meet me here. I'm not asking you to prove yourself. I'm asking you to be present. That's it. The door is open. Look, with what the Apostle Paul calls the eyes of your heart. Close your physical eyes if you're in a place where you can, and just look, not for what you expect to see, not for what you think you're supposed to see, just look. Notice where he is, if anything comes. Notice his expression, if there is one. Don't force it, don't dismiss it, just look. Fix your gaze. Stay with whatever is there. Or stay with the open space if nothing has arrived yet. Notice how it feels to be in that space. Present, honest, not performing. Notice what, if anything, arrives. When you come back, if something came, write it down before you interpret it. Just capture what you noticed. And if nothing came, that's worth writing down too. What that felt like, what the space was like. Both are real. The question we started with was, is any of this real? And the honest answer, the intellectually defensible answer, after sitting with the historical comparison, is that there is more reason to look than to dismiss. You don't have to be certain to take the next step. Thomas wasn't certain before he walked back into that room. He just walked back in. The door that Thomas walked back through is still open. Honest scrutiny is welcome here. So is honest looking. If this episode opened something for you, or raised a question you want to go deeper on, Chapter 3 of the Inside Out Study Guide is the companion to this conversation. It's called Reasonable Reality. It's the historical comparison laid out in detail, the scripture anchors we walked through today, reflection questions you can sit with, and the practice written out step by step. The anchor article for this episode is called Reasonable Truth. It's also at tedtalking.life, and it takes the comparative framework further than we can go in a single episode. Next time, episode 4, We're going to take everything we've established and go to the heart of it. Because once you've cleared the ground, once you've decided the foundation is worth standing on, there's still a deeper question underneath. And it is this: who exactly have you been picturing when you think about God? Because the God you've been avoiding, or the God you've been trying to appease, may not be who you think. Next episode, we're going to look at that image directly, where it came from, why both of you, the one who left and the one who stayed, have been reacting to the same fiction, and who the real one actually is. I'll see you there.